you ready to be a part of the new revolution in conspiracy talk radio? Then tune into the Extreme Society Show every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on the EXS Radio Network.
All right, we're back. EXSradio.net is our website. Make sure that you come onto our website, check us out. If you are on Facebook, make sure you look us up at facebook.com/EXS Radio. EXS Radio is a proud partner of Dark Matter Radio Network, so make sure you support those folks over there too. Check out their full schedule of shows that are airing 7 days a week and find the show you like. Also, too, if you like ours, which we hope you do, we want you to email us at theextremesociety@live.com with any show topics or show ideas that you would like to discuss with us and us with each other.
And don't forget to follow us on Twitter.
Exactly. Yeah, Matt will be handling the Twitter, and we'll be bringing on our guest here tonight, which is Eugene Irving, and he is a lead researcher from acalltoactions.com. Eugene, are you with us?
I am.
Hey, what's going on, sir? How you doing today?
Doing excellent. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, we can hear you great. Well,
Very well.
Just to share with you who you'll be speaking with here, of course, you've got me, Jim. We've got Vinny.
Hello.
We've got Miss Christina.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
And we've got Johnny Anonymous.
Nice to meet you, sir.
And also on via satellite, we got Matt from Columbus.
Hello.
So we appreciate you coming on. We were hoping Kimberly was going to be able to join in too, but I guess she was pretty sick. But you guys are actually pretty big bloggers when it comes to Facebook. I see you guys involved with a lot of different topics, and I thought it would be great to have you on to share some information about what you do at the website and to talk a little bit about chemtrails. But I want to give the floor to you real quick here so you can kind of tell our audience what's going on with acalltoactions.com.
Well, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all you guys, and really appreciate you having us on. And, it's pretty timely that you guys have asked us to be on because Kimberly just ran the LA Marathon, 26.2 miles.
I saw.
In fact. And, she's a very avid trainer, obviously, for something like that. You have to do a lot of training. And the bottom line is she's seen a direct correlation in her health and in the way that she's feeling when there is a heavier spraying of these so-called chemtrails. And for those who don't, it's a very convoluted issue when we get to chemtrailing. And, one of the things I say is leave it up to me to make a controversial subject even more so, because there's a lot of people out there, and I stand with these guys who are a proponent of educating the public about these things, the adverse health effects, and the geoengineering aspect of what these things are meant to do. Chemtrailing agenda is a multifaceted operation with many different applications. Again, and do you guys have a question?
Well, yeah. Hey, Eugene, this is Matt. I just wanted to to kind of level set here so that we're all clear on the same page as to what we're talking about when we refer to chemtrails. What specifically are chemtrails in your opinion?
Okay, again, it's a multi-arrayed system with many different applications, and I would simply say to look up because chemtrail. The U.S. Postal Service back in 2005 put out a series of stamps, which are the 30 new types of clouds. Okay, this is basically an element of propaganda in our media in the Postal Service, from my opinion, and chemtrailings are basically, the most well-known aspect of this agenda is the fine particulates of heavy metals that are distributed in our atmosphere that then, in turn, interact with electromagnetic frequency that is generated from installations like HAARP and various radar installations around the world. And it's a very clear issue, and I think that's a very big issue also, that largely the public remains unaware that this has been going on right over their head, and it's completely obvious to those of us that have seen these. I mean, what you'll typically see, you can watch the time-lapse videos of a plane coming in and basically distributing these trails that then in turn kind of just make a huge band of this kind of a toxic soup, which is actually these fine particulates on a nano size adhering to this electromagnetic frequency that's in our atmosphere. And, there's many different reasons in which they have admitted that they're doing this. For those who are unaware, it's a stated objective from our U.S. Air Force and other military branches to own the weather by 2025. There's a very telling document out there that was released in 1997 from the U.S. Air Force entitled just that, Owning the Weather by 2025, Weather as a Force Multiplier. And so this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not conjecture. Again, this is a stated objective from our military. And so when we really begin to look at this aspect of it, it really should raise the brow of many different people and say, what's going on here if they're unaware of what's really going on with chemtrailing. And, when I say something like, leave it up to me to make it more controversial, as I stand with those people who are a proponent of making people aware of the adverse health effects and all these other things, of course, we can, link aluminum, which is a primary component, aluminum oxide, and these chemtrailings to Alzheimer's. There's been, direct studies for that from Harvard and many other places that are very reputable. There also are positive applications for these things, and that's a very controversial subject amongst the people who would like to get people more aware of these, the potential detriments. Some of those things would be, in the event of a potential bioweapons release, for example, if one of those were to happen in an urban center, this is a way in which you could forcibly inoculate prior to the release of one of these bioagents, or you could, release a cure, so to speak, for a bioweapons release after the fact with chemtrails, which are then, of course, inhaled as they fall down to the ground and inhaled into the human body. And what we find is that more often than not, that it's almost maybe a sinister agenda for some people. And, some people would say that it started out with the best intentions. I don't really want to speculate on that too much. I mean, my bottom line is if there's adverse health effects, then the public needs to be made aware of this. And it's a very pressing issue to get that done.
Well, let me ask you this other question then. I know you kind of didn't want to speculate, but I'm very curious. What do you believe the chemtrails are being carried out for? What purpose? What intent?
Well, that's a good question. It's stated that one of these things that they would like to do is global dimming. That's the exact term that they'll use in an attempt to thwart global warming. And this is a convoluted issue, and there's so many different sides to this. When we get into the areas of space weather and weather, not only in our solar system, but throughout our galaxy, which is a very real issue that we experience every day here on this earth. There's a lot of different factors here that are at play. We have solar cycles to contend with, and, even the energy from the galactic center itself affects things here on this planet. This is very well known in the upper echelons of the scientific community. And, I would say that it may have started out with the best intentions, and there may be some very serious threats that are out there from these different space weather type components in this story here that are still heavily classified. They don't want to talk about this kind of stuff. And, we just reached the culmination of a 25,920 year cycle on the shortest day of 2012. This is the cycle known as precession of the equinoxes, in which the Earth's axis is shifting 1 degree every 72 years. And if we go back through the fossil record and just in a geological a way of thinking about this issue, we do see cyclical occurrences, including floods, ice ages, and all these other type of, potential cataclysms for the human civilization that, again, are very cyclical, and they're just kind of like clockwork. And so, essentially we have reached one tilt of this axis of the Earth. And so when something like that happens, there are obviously other forces at play within our own solar system and beyond that are making the tilt occur, and this, does affect global climate patterns very clearly. And so that may be the primary component of what we're seeing here being played out with this agenda. And, is it just people out there trying to keep us okay is a very controversial issue when we look at the adverse health effects and all these other things, because people become so misguided when they don't take the whole picture into account. I mean, we largely deal at a call to actions, and many of the other researchers that we work with the issue of compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is a way in which an agenda is carried out where the guy next to you, you work at the NSA, you work at the Raytheon or any of these other defense contractors, or you name it, out there in the classified field, the guy next to you probably doesn't have any idea what you're working on, and they do that. So, there's only a very few people at the top who have an understanding of these things that are pulling the strings back there. And it's difficult for people to want to trust those people when you see things that are killing people and soft killing us with these adverse health effects. And so I clearly understand that. And that's why I'm a very strong proponent about, educating the public about this and getting this information out there. And so that would be the primary thing in which I would consider. I would say that it gets out into space weather and how that affects us here on this earth. And also, there also is clearly a depopulation agenda that is going on out there. And it's a well-stated thing from many different leaders and other researchers in the scientific community in order to do this because of, they feel like, again, the compartmentalization plays such a strong role. They feel like, we were unable to sustain ourselves here because of the resources and other things on this planet, which is largely false because, we have, big oil and these other interests, which are, heavily suppressing energy technologies and other things, which make it viable here for us to sustain ourselves in a more wholesome way.
Well, see, Eugene, this is where I have a problem with and this is Jim, by the way. This is the problem that I have with the whole chemtrail idea. I understand, the points that you're bringing up about weather modification and so on and so forth. But when I go onto blogs and so on and so forth, and I get in a lot of arguments with people, not intentionally trying to argue with people, but it just kind of ends up turning up that way sometimes, is about the whole depopulation and trying to purposely poison people. To me, the whole concept of shooting a chemtrail into the atmosphere to try to either, I've heard theories about that they're trying to dumb people down, that they're trying to kill people off. To me, it doesn't make sense. And the reason for that is because there are much more effective ways that if there is a I can't even talk, a way that they're trying to poison people, they would do it in other ways such as food and water, not by chemicals in the sky.
Well, I appreciate that in you to have a pure way of looking at that, and I would argue that does have an effect in your environment, and that is the fundamental key to where I'm really leading to in my research, which I'll kind of get to here in a minute, which is another very primary element of the chemtrailing agenda, which has been heavily compartmentalized. And largely they are doing that, Jim, with the fluoridation, the water, the GMO, and all these other things. They are soft killing us, and I think that it's a miracle that we are even able to still function as a human organism with all of the different things that are basically being bombarded upon us. I mean, when you see, NASA has come out and admitted that in FEMA Sector 3, they were spraying lithium over it. You don't do that for any other reason other than to basically try to bring a sedative or a calming effect on the people. So, there is factual documented proof of this going on.
But why would they do that though? Because they're also breathing and using the same resources that we are. So how are they the people that are controlling it? So what? How are they protecting themselves?
Well, I don't want to get too extreme for you, but I would say that there are interests in this when you get into NASA's when you get into organizations like NASA and others that are off planet, and I think that it's so highly mathematically improbable that there would not be life elsewhere. It's really a no-brainer to consider that there probably is. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Right.
And I know that's kind of a very controversial subject. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
No, we're controversial here.
What's that?
We're very controversial here, so it's all right.
Well, okay. Good. I feel right at home then. The bottom line is I would say that there are interests that are beyond just what are good for humans in this agenda.
Okay.
And I think that there's a battle going on amongst them right now.
And so I just had a quick question on that line of discussion. So are you saying that in your opinion this ties into the question of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitation? Is that what?
Absolutely, I would.
You're saying?
There is a resounding consensus amongst the leading researchers in the field, many of which I have been in contact with. Carnicom Institute was one that initially began to do the research into chemtrailing. A lot of them left and went to go work with a friend of mine named Candy Griffin, who heads up the Morgellons Research Group, and that's morgellonsresearchgroup.com, and they are very, very well respected and some excellent researchers in this field, and clearly there has been experimental, things waged on the unknowing public when it comes to this. And when we get into the UFO aspect, there is video footage out there. We have, I put up a document the other day of some metamaterials, which basically means like metamorphosis, if you will, in which you have a negative refraction index and all these different types of things in which there's a cloaking element to these types of materials. And what they can do is basically have an invisible type of craft. And what it looks like is, and this is kind of a good time for what I was going to be leading to here in the next little part of my research. It seems to be that these guys will propagate a hologram out of a cloaked craft in order to distribute these chemtrails. And so what I'm saying is you would have a cloaked craft that is propagating a hologram. You'd have a huge, God knows what it really looks like, tanker sort of craft, which is able to distribute these chemtrailings, which if you go look at satellite imagery from NASA, it's a no-brainer. I mean, contrails will not form typically below 30,000 feet. This is largely due to the way the condensation actually forms, which is the term contrail is for condensation. And it's just a scientific fact that contrails will not form and dissipate over, tens and sometimes hundreds of square miles in our atmosphere. It's just a simple fact of science. And so when we see this going on, contrails will typically dissipate in about 5 to 10 minutes. And so anytime we're seeing these things being sprayed and then they hang out basically in the atmosphere here, you're seeing the stuff adhere to electromagnetic frequency in our atmosphere. And so it's very interesting when we look at the holographic aspect of this and the chemtrailing agenda, and when you tie it into the UFOs and stuff. I don't know if you guys have heard of Project Bluebeam. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
We've heard it discussed on this show before.
Well, here's a very crucial element of the compartmentalization that has been not ignored, but simply compartmentalized. And that is that the human organism has a profound manifestive effect in their environment. And this is largely due to what has been known as the collapse of the wave function that occurs when we basically bring something into our field of vision. This is known as the observance principle. And it has been conclusively shown in test studies around the world on the atomic level and other areas in which the simple act of human observation brings something into focus which was not there before.
You're talking about like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and all that, like in quantum theory.
This is the fundamental basis of quantum theory. That's correct. And, I would argue that Project Bluebeam is us, and here is why. When we talk about the fundamental aspect of this quantum theory being the collapse of this wave function, and basically we are interpreting our environment through a series of electrical activity in our brains that is coming through our senses, including our sixth sense, which is our pineal gland, which is kind of like a projector that's in our brain, kind of. And the DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and I'd love to forward you guys these documents. I've put them up on my page many times, and they've known this for a long time, that the primary components that were first identified in the chemtrailing agenda, which would be aluminum oxide, barium, and strontium, are the ideal medium in which to propagate holograms into. And so if we take a step back and we look at that real quick, the implications of that are profound, because what we're looking at here is a whole interactive type of environment in which we are creating in, which, can be seeded when they, I don't know how the audience may feel about the propaganda and the different ways that, in which the mind has basically become under assault out there. I would say that the research is overwhelming, and I coined the phrase, mind control is dismissed due to its effectiveness. And I don't say that to sound big. I think that it's a very evident in our society today, and I think that people are largely breaking away from that today, and it's nice to see that. And so basically what I'm leading to is that we have this ability to create in our environment, and we're doing it from a subconscious perspective, which largely makes it something difficult for us to ascertain simply because it's from that subconscious perspective. And, to make that crucial link between, what is the holographic ramifications of this? What are those? And does that make sense to you guys?
It's definitely a topic that I have been interested as well. Like, because that kind of touches on. There was that documentary a few years ago called "What the Bleep Do We Know?" that talks about that exact same thing, about the collapsing of the quantum wave function, and that the things that we see in the world and in the universe exist because our mind consciously observes and interprets those events, and it gets into a lot of that kind of interesting stuff. I think that's where you were kind of going with that, right?
You nailed it. And it's really fascinating for me to consider that. And at the end of the day, it's obligatory for me, the more that I realize the abilities that I have as an individual to create in my environment, to try to keep a good perspective on things, because we're affecting things. The Emoto experiments are a great reference source material for this. There's been a lot of people who have thrown everything in the book to try to discredit this. I would encourage anybody to go and try it for themselves. And there's many other well-documented case studies in which we see sound materializing matter. And this is, of course, another one of our senses, sound. And they'll basically modulate a frequency on a plate of fine particulates, and as you change the frequency, the geometric pattern of those particulates will literally change. And it's so beautiful to think about that. And when we think about the power of the human voice and how that must be creating an environment, it really becomes a whole can of worms. It just really interests me quite a bit. But
now, just to get back onto the Project Bluebeam question. Now, my understanding was that, at least I know in kind of conspiracy circles, Project Bluebeam has been discussed as being an effort by, at least what I've seen, by the government or some government agency to create either a false first contact alien experience, right, that to trick people into believing that they are being contacted by aliens through the use of some kind of like giant hologram in the sky, or to be used to trick people into believing they are witnessing some kind of a mystical religious event like the second coming of Christ, and that people would believe that they were witnessing the beginnings of the prophecies of Revelations, and or they've talked about using it over Middle Eastern countries where it would trick them into believing that the so-called the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, had returned, which is supposed to be part of the Islamic end times prophecies. That's kind of what I had understood it to be. Is that kind of where?
That's
what your understanding
exactly,
is?
Absolutely, and that is exactly what we're told about Project Bluebeam today. And what I would say is that the way in which they could do that, I mean, you could do it, you could propagate it with a bunch of lasers and do all these different things from satellites and all that kind of stuff, or you could have a ship out in the sea propagating a hologram and all this. Of course, you would either have to have an autonomous system, which would doing that through an artificial intelligence to do that without any people knowing, or you would have to have a whole group of people doing that actively for you, who basically had some type of insidious intent upon the public with that type of technology. And what I would say is that what these guys found out is that when you place a seed into the human consciousness, the manifestive result is tangible and physical. And that is a very fundamental secret to our existence. It's probably the primary component to our existence, which is very profound from my experience.
Say that again. That if you put a seed of an idea, are you talking about like something like predictive programming, where if you throw out an idea like through movies or television, that people will be more apt to accept that idea? Is that kind of what
I would, I would say, and by accepting that idea that may be seeded into the collective consciousness of this planet, there then begins to have a manifestive result in the physical due to the acceptance of it, because we're resonating. I would say that consciousness reacts within and upon itself, and it's basically emanating and exponentially growing from and emanating out from each individual. And we do this collectively with that. Anytime we have a collective sense of belief and an idea, an archetype, or a belief system, the manifestive result in the physical is that much more profound. And this, again, is a very fundamental secret that is a heavily guarded secret. And if we go into the the underlying themes of every ancient text across this world, that is it, is that we create in our environment. And isn't that beautiful? Wow, this is like the most heavily classified secret from any black defense project that you could ever learn, is simply that one simple truth.
Well, so getting back to the more basic topic of chemtrails. So what, for somebody who is maybe just coming into this discussion, if they were to ask you what evidence is there, direct evidence, that convinces you or convinces others that these trails that we see in the sky are in fact not condensation trails, but they are trails of chemicals being deliberately sprayed out of nozzles on the backs of planes, what is the convincing evidence that shows that that is in fact the case, that they are chemtrails rather than the common, contrails that we all have been taught about?
That's a great question. I feel like just being a conscious observer in your environment is very telling. And when we look up and we see, next time somebody out there who may be a little questionable about the issue of chemtrailing, look up there and see somebody spraying this long trail, and you're basically programmed at that point to dismiss it as a contrail. I've got a friend out there who would say the con is in the trail. Know this: look up the parameters in which condensation and contrails will actually form, and realize that these things dissipate in less than 10 minutes, and they don't typically form below 30,000 feet. Anytime we have a low altitude spraying, sometimes these things are down at 6,000 feet. Certainly they're, 10,000 feet and above and well below 30,000 feet, which doesn't fit in these scientific, parameters in which we know that contrails won't form under unless they're in these very specific and type of conditions. The bottom line is we are, when these things begin to dissipate, they begin to expand rather, and they don't dissipate, and they're basically forming a blanket over our given area, this is a telltale factor that there's something going on here. And, the issue... Go ahead.
I was going to say, but I don't understand why why would they make it so obvious? Why wouldn't all chemtrails just be sprayed from low-flying aircraft?
Or make it invisible, for that matter.
That's a good question. The sheer magnitude of this program is very difficult for somebody to get their mind around, particularly when there's so much vested in people not understanding this. And there's two sides to that coin. There are people out here who are trying to get people aware of this so they could have a positive effect in their environment. However, it's a multi-arrayed system, again, with so many different applications. I mean, one of the things that chemtrails are known to do in the military, for example, is open up a specific radio frequency band in a specific combat zone. And this is basically done by distributing heavy metals over a given battlefield, in which you have a specific frequency band that is able to be utilized for that zone that is nowhere else, and it's unable to be penetrated by enemy, counterintelligence gathering technology. It is able to be tapped into, but largely these guys wouldn't even know that this band was there.
But what about
that's one of...
What about with wind streams and stuff like that? I mean, let's just say, for an example, if you're going to go over and spray over Columbus, Ohio, I mean, you're doing it at a certain altitude. With the wind streams that are out there, just because you're spraying over the city doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fall onto Columbus. So I just don't understand. I mean,
no, that's right.
You know what I mean?
That's I can tell that you've thought about that. I appreciate that. And obviously these guys take that into account. You may spray over Columbus, Ohio, in order to have an effect down in Florida on the weather patterns, for example, because they take the wind patterns into account. And so, you'll spray above the line where you're trying to get it down to. And, for those who don't understand what HAARP is, that's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, which is very connected to chemtrailing. This is an installation with 1 billion watts of power electrical power, RF, and it's stated that what they'll do with this is open up a hole in the ionosphere that's 30 miles wide by 30 miles deep, which very effectively alters the jet stream pattern, which therefore creates an effect on global climate patterns. It's very rudimentary. It's not some mumbo-jumbo conspiracy theory. It's a stated fact, what's going on right now with our tax dollars. You can look it up for yourself. There's a guy out there named Paul Bernhardt, who is the lead plasma physicist for DARPA on the HARP project. Mm-hmm. And he has won an award for his, involvement in this area of this plasma manipulation in the ionosphere. And that's why it's strategically located in Alaska, because the jet stream, of course, comes down from the northern region there off the polar ice cap up there. And again, this creates global climate patterns. And when you can manipulate that, you have a very, very effective methodology in which to control things on this earth, including the growing of food, which is, we directly see, here's one of the things that is a real telltale sign that there's something going on with chemtrails. What we know is that aluminum oxide is a primary component of the chemtrails. It's also a very common element that's found in our ground table. However, the levels have been increasing dramatically across the board. There has been many different examples of the research of this, many of them coming from our own Forestry Service, the U.S. Forestry Service, in which the aluminum oxide levels have just basically gone through the roof. And we see a direct correlation. And a defense contractor who first created Agent Orange, for example, known as Monsanto, which has been kicked out of like 15 countries, by the way, and that they have created aluminum-resistant crops. Why in the heck would they want to do that when it's a naturally occurring thing in our ground table if they're not distributing it from an aerial vantage point of doing this? And so that's a very telltale factor when we begin to kind of unravel this and put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Now, I got another question, because we've talked to some people and even had some people on the show before that will claim, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this here, that as soon as they have witnessed a chemtrail over let's say their home or just say anywhere near them, they instantly start feeling ill. Do you think that's giving a bad image of what's really going on?
They may have a particular belief attached to that chemtrailing agenda, which is affecting their health. I would reference any placebo study that's ever been out there. Anytime we see a complete alleviation of symptoms in the placebo group, of course, which there's tens of thousands of examples of, one of the things that Big Pharma doesn't want to tell you so they can continue to basically milk you for money as they're killing you. And there's good people still out there in these organizations. I don't mean to sound like everybody's bad, because it's simply not that way. If it was, we would have already been done in.
Right.
And so, the bottom line with that is, we do have an effect on our health with the way that we think, to kind of get to the root of that. But also, we do see a very clear indicator of things like, again, aluminum oxide has a direct correlation to the rise in Alzheimer's disease. And so it is quite possible that we do see adverse health effects that do begin to manifest in the human body based on what we know about them pretty quickly. And some people do have a very heightened sensitivity to some of these things. People have allergies, and this heightened sensitivity can be a gift if we use it correctly. I have a friend out there, Russ Tanner, who heads up geoengineeringwatch.com, and he's very sensitive to these things, and it's something that really can affect people.
But it can't be instantly, though. I mean, could it? I just don't see it being possible.
Time. Yeah. I think that you would really get into the act of the belief of that individual in their body, which is a very crucial component of our existence, by the way. But I would say that it's more complicated than just that one piece of it. But certainly, it does take time for these things to fall down to the ground level and to be inhaled into our bodies. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever spoken with or know of Al DiCicco?
The name rings a bell, but I'm not sure if I'm familiar with their work.
Al DiCicco, we've had him on the show quite a few times, and he's out in the Phoenix, Arizona area. He's been on our show quite a few times, and he's a friend of the show. He made a couple of YouTube videos where he had posted, his health and what they found in his bloodstream and so forth about and linking them to chemtrails that are over the Arizona area.
If I remember, he was part of a group that was they were bringing a lawsuit in the state of Arizona against the state government or against the federal government about chemtrails, and they were trying to basically fight the chemtrailing of his home state in court and trying to produce evidence that would actually stand up legally in a court of law. Now, I don't know whatever came of that, but I know that was a couple of years ago. So I'm kind of curious what happened. I haven't heard anything.
Well, he had all those chemicals that they had found in his body, but then, we also, determined that he was also living near an area that was a nuclear testing zone. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to determine, okay, was it the chemtrails that caused this to him, supposedly, or could it be poisoning from nuclear testing that's been done in the area?
Interesting.
So, that's the biggest question I have and the biggest problem that I have. And that was, one of the questions that I asked on the Facebook post that was on there is I was like, what is your interpretation? Because, we've spoken with a lot of people out there that seem to think that it's depressants that they're putting in the air, or they're putting things in the air to sterilize human beings and so on and so forth. And to me, if I'm the leader of some sort of an evil group that wants to either depopulate a certain area or poison people on purpose, I think what they're doing is just a little too complicated. To me, there would just be better ways to do it than to make something so obvious in the sky that somebody would look up and see, hey, I see this line that doesn't look normal, maybe they're poisoning me. How about if I just put it in your water, a tasteless chemical? And I know you had mentioned that they are doing that too, but if I put it in your water supply, at least I can direct it to where I want it to go. Like in the Cleveland area, if I want to direct it to the west side suburbs, that's what I'm going to do. If I want to direct it to the east side, I can do that too. So I can wipe out certain parts of certain communities just through the water system.
Do you think about committing mass murder often?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Because it sounds like you really give that a lot of thought.
No.
Like if there was a particular
there's a lot
neighborhood.
to say about this, guys. There's a lot to say because when we look at this agenda, I really am almost dumbfounded at how to begin getting into what you've just said because I would start at the Georgia Guidestones. Again, this is not a conspiracy theory. I think that Ted Turner actually put these up. Of course, he started CNN and is a major player, obviously, in the media and in shaping people's minds. The number one, the Georgia Guidestones, of course, are in Georgia, and there's a stated agenda there and how things will become to be on this planet if these guys would have their way. And the number one thing on there is to keep the world's population at 500 million or below. Okay, so, maybe they don't really care too much about putting to the side of town as they do basically doing it to everyone.
But a lot of
I've interviewed...
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I've interviewed a lot of different people from a lot of different places and backgrounds, and, one of the things that we see is that, there is a resounding consensus amongst us that, seriously, there is a depopulation agenda out there. And what I would say is, about the sedative and all that stuff and the fact of how that is, if it works, then you're not really going to be looking up that much, number one. But more importantly, let's not forget that the human organism responds to a stimulus in its environment. That's one of the criteria that any organism has to meet in order to be a complex living organism, is there simply a response to a stimulus in their environment. And so, when we begin to think about that, we are overcoming this from my perspective. And so the fact that, again, that we're still able to function is a true testament to the human spirit. And the fact that we're even able to have this conversation cognitively today when people, and with an objective point of view here, because I appreciate everybody's point of view, and the compartmentalization has been so heavy, and I don't ever want to seem like I'm trying to tell people what to think. I am simply here to offer the pieces of the puzzle to other people and let them draw their own conclusions and share my own with them. And so I would just simply say that the fact that we see natural adaptation and selection in a given species in any environment when it's a closed environment. If that closed environment happens to be the entire planet, then there's going to be a global response to the stimulus. And so if these guys are going to, we see Staphylococcus, for example, strep throat in hospitals. There's a strain that only lives in a hospital, and it's a particularly vigorous strain because it has grown immune to the different types of treatment in which are used for it. And I would say that the human organism is capable of much more than that.
Yeah.
And I find comfort in that we're able to basically overcome these, perhaps insidious or evil stimulus, which we may be subjected to unknowingly.
Right. Well, we appreciate you being very open-minded to this too, because I'll be honest with you. I mean, there are some conspiracy theories that I do believe in, and there's some that I do debate. But I'm glad that you had mentioned the Georgia Guidestones, because that was designed by R.C. Christian, which that isn't even his real name, but that's the name that he's portrayed as, how he wanted to be portrayed as the creator of these Guidestones. But he was a Christian man himself, and a lot of conspiracy theorists that I see out there that will sit there and trash talk the Guidestones and throw Illuminati propaganda along with it are Christian people too. And do they not realize that this was actually created by a Christian also?
Well, I would say that I'm not ashamed of the name of Jesus Christ. I believe he was here in the flesh. However, clearly, to take a scriptural example, it's clearly warned that there would be hypocrites amongst who would come in the name
Right.
and call themselves Christians. And that is the perfect guise in which these guys like to operate under, And we see that across the board many times. Look at the Vatican, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to call, I think that, I don't want to call it the whole Vatican. I would say that there are efforts within it which are, trying to weed out the evil things that are embedded in it, and anybody who thinks that sounds fanatical, go ahead and just type in Vatican Lucifer into your Google search box or whichever one that you use, and go ahead and
talking about the telescope.
They own the world's largest telescope, and they have an attachment for it called Lucifer, which is an acronym, which, these guys are very aware of space weather and all the different anomalous activity that's basically going on in our skies right now, that has to do with ETs and all these other things. And, I think it's fascinating when I consider that, I like to call it holographic coagulation, and I think that, our blood, our DNA is a vast storage medium in which certainly has been affected by these chemtrails. They have literally added an extra amino acid into the human body. We have seen this time and time again. I would refer anybody to the morgellonsresearchgroup.com there to see this type of stuff, and Candy Griffin's work along with her other band of researchers there. But, it's interesting to me that when we see a ballpark figure of 97% in two different instances, and that would be that one is that the 97% of our DNA is junk DNA, and that 97% of our universe is, the so-called dark matter or dark energy. I would say that we're largely seeing a reflection of who we really are in our environment that doesn't just exist here on this planet. I would say that there's elements of our higher selves which we become in touch with because of the fact of being able to observe and get back in touch with them. I think that's a really interesting, thing to consider.
Yeah, Eugene. My name is Johnny, but I have a really quick question. One thing I wanted to touch upon, chemtrails. I'm 100% on your side, and I know that chemtrails are used by the government for a variety of reasons. But one question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to chemtrails and how our government uses it, I wanted to know from your perspective what the number one goal is for our government to gain with the use of chemtrails. I mean, I know they do the testing and stuff like that. I know they use chemtrails to see how people react when it comes to behavior and how they think and their cognitive development and stuff like that. Hallucination, I know they use that for hallucination and stuff like that. What I'm questioning is, what do you think our government, and when I say government because I'm a conspiracy theorist. Thank you, Jim. What I'm wanting to know is, what is our country and our world trying to do with the use of chemtrails? Are we trying to control our population? Are you trying to manipulate our behavior? Trying to just totally control how people think of the government, for that matter? What do you think the government and our world are trying to do with the use of chemtrails? Number one. I know there's multiple ones, but I want to see what you think is number one on our list.
That's a great question, and it's a very loaded question, because when we define the word government, real quickly. We're looking at many different interests with many different agendas and different factions trying to carry those out. And I would argue that we are clearly at war within those elements right now, and we have been for a matter of many years.
Yes.
And so, I would say that there are positive elements that are going on with this kind of stuff. Don't ever forget that it's a two-way street out here with stuff, and there are people out here to fight the good fight. Sure. Become one of those people. If you are one of those people, and simply have a good effect in your environment by having a pure intention is very powerful. Anytime that we couple a heart with somebody else's, it has an exponential effect. But it's hard to nail down the number one thing. I would say the number one thing on the bad side, so to speak, if we have to put it into context, because it's really a two-sided issue here. There's good and bad in all things, and let's just not forget that. Would be depopulation, killing agenda, mind control, behavior control, all of those things that we clearly see and that you're obviously well aware of. On the flip side of that coin, we are making an effort to show that we can have an effect in our environment. Go look at the Emoto experiments, reference a placebo study, understand the human organism's ability to create its environment with its intention. For a Christian, if the word alchemy or transmutation would have a negative connotation attached to it because of some type of indoctrinated bias that we've accumulated through some propaganda technique of these people that have infiltrated what's been known as the church, which basically means the called out ones. I'm not trying to preach at you. Water into wine is the perfect example of transmutation. And clearly, scripturally, we are capable of doing these things ourselves. And so that is where we're really going to have to get. We're going to be stripped away of all these other things. And to understand that that's where the battleground is very important for us. And so it's a two-sided coin to really answer your question from my perspective.
So you're saying that half of it's good, half of it's bad? Because the perception that I get is with depopulation. I think depopulation is the number one reason that our government, and actually in my category is the New World Order, I think depopulation is number one on the list. That's my
Let me tell
perception.
you, I'd like to tell you that. Who am I speaking with?
My name is Johnny Anonymous. I'm really anti-government, and I think I'm being
okay. Well, hey, Johnny, check this out, brother. My father was a patent holder on a device which would have cost oil companies billions of dollars by now, which was suppressed. This has been a fundamental aspect of my life, my whole life. And to throw this in, my father, Eugene Irvin Jr., led the failed Senate campaign for George Bush Sr., the first man who ever said New World Order on television in 1970. My dad led that campaign.
Wow.
I'm very proud of that fact.
I'm
and
very
I'd like
proud
to
of
say
that,
that
too.
the apple does not fall too far from the tree. And so I appreciate what you're saying. And I would say that even if there's, 98%, 95% of these people out there that are bad, which I don't believe that. I believe that people are mostly good. And it's important for me to try to believe that. And it's simply by believing that I see them become better. I become better.
I question the government. When it comes to government, that's when I start questioning.
No, absolutely. It doesn't take another half. We don't have to have 50% to beat them, brother. We don't.
Okay.
Because we stand in truth. We stand in goodness. It's pure.
Exactly.
And so this, I would say that these guys are basically a bunch of scared idiots.
Perfectly said.
Who serve the wrong, force of energy out there, and they need to reckon that within themselves. And I would say that it's important for us to have an element of forgiveness when we look at them. And trust me, my dad was killed because of his invention and these other things that have gone on in my life. And so I understand the element of forgiveness being a difficult one, and I would say that it is a very powerful one.
Yeah. I'm 100% on your side. I want the people that feel controlled. A lot of them are giving in and just submissive to them. And I want more of us people to come out like it was in the 60s and the 70s. I want more of us people to be coming out and revolting against how we feel like we're controlled now. And I get what you're saying with that, and you're making a good point. I thank you for that.
And I say it on almost every show, guys. We've encountered a healthy band of censorship, largely due to what I just told you. This has been a battle for me my whole life to try to get out this type of information and the set of experiences and the things that I've been through, and working with everyone else out there. It's
very much.
It's all of us working together that brings this together. it's just amazing that we're even still here to think about this when we think of the things that we're up against. And clearly, it sounds like you have a good picture of that. Let's try to stand together and be positive. And what I say on almost every show is that we've seen it across the board, this revolt that you've mentioned.
Yes.
We have seen, Brazil, Egypt have the largest uprising in world history, guys. We see
recently.
Ukraine going on right now. We had, name the country out there that largely our media has been trying to cover it up and not talk about these things. And that just goes to show how heavily our media has been controlled. And it's, there are elements within the media big time right now on a national level.
No,
we see
I'm
a story
100%
like
on your side, man. Eugene, man, I'm backing you up 100%. 100%,
Thank you.
dude.
I appreciate that.
Thank
And,
you.
I do that for you as well, brother, and that's what it takes.
Our Lord is there for you,
that's
man.
what, that's what it takes, is for all of us to be 100% as we stand together. Because, every time we add a heart to somebody else's heart, literally we're created equally. That is an exponential, by definition, increase in which is happening right there and occurring, which has a more manifestive effect on the environment. It's that much more powerful. And when we get so many people doing this, it's coming here.
Right.
We are basically, in the country that has become, and I love my country. Okay, I remember the Constitution, and I remember what it was supposed to be all about, a constitutional republic, and, not some figurehead for some globalist agenda that basically is pushing people to kill people out there. And what I would like to say is that as a member of our team, and a man that we work with, one of our researchers who has been a political exile, he has not seen his family in over 3 years. He will not be able to see them for another 7 years because he's not allowed to go back to where he lives. He's been through so much. His name is Kevin Galilee. He is going to the Vatican, guys, to do a hunger strike to bring this whole depopulation agenda to the world stage. And we would like as much support about that as we can get.
Support him 100%.
You can find his work. You can see the usindependent.com, and you can see www.calltoactions.com. And if you guys, if it's on your heart to try to support him to help him get there, he needs it. And there's heavily vested interest in us not getting this done. And they try to control it through the monetary system. They try to control it through all these other ways in which has been used as a methodology of control upon it. And all of those things we will be able to overcome when we stand together, guys.
Well, I definitely think that'll be worth checking out, that's for sure. And I don't mean to cut you off here, but we're running a little short on time. But we do appreciate you taking the time and joining us here tonight, and we'll hope to do it again here in the future. But I kind of want to leave on one question. This is kind of a little off the topic, but we were talking about this in the beginning of the news. If you could, and as quick as you can here, what happened to the airplane? In your opinion?
It's unclear. I haven't been following that story very heavily. I've heard a lot of different things. I do know that there was a leading scientist on that plane who had to do with fiber optic technology and other types of communications, which largely is the area of my research. And it's very interesting that he was one of the most prominent scientists that was on board that flight. That has been that one issue has been completely ignored by the media, and that's where I will pick up my investigation on this deal. And I haven't really had time to dig into it too much, but it's unclear as to actually how it went down. There's so many different types of weaponry out there. I mean, maybe it flips into another dimension. I mean, I could conjecture about it with you, but I really just don't know.
That's what we were kind of talking about, too.
Right. Well, I'll encourage everybody to check out the website at calltoactions.com. Eugene, thanks for taking the time to join us tonight, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again, and I'll make sure that I give you all the information you need, so if anybody happened to miss tonight's show, that they'll be able to catch the replay or download the podcast.
Excellent, guys. Thanks so much for having me, and look forward to being back on with you guys anytime.
All right, sounds good.
Thank
Take care
you,
now.
Eugene, man. Thank you, man.
Bye-bye.
All right, I think what we're going to do is take a quick break, and we come back, we're going to, I think, have a quick Rev report, and then we're also going to go into the news, and that'll wrap up tonight's show. So everybody, again, if you're listening for the very first time on the Dark Matter Radio Network, make sure you check us out at extremesociety@live.com. It's our email address, and our website is exsradio.net. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk news.
Waging war against Big Brother, mainstream